Hello, everyone. Welcome to ChurchMilitant.tv's new show, Losing My Religion, with Father Lewis of the Fathers of Mercy.
Good to see you, Michael. Good, good.
This show is dedicated really to helping Catholics understand how all these little different cultural markers that many of us don't even realize once were cultural markers of the faith, how to reclaim them, understand why we have them. Why do we make the sign of the cross? Why do we have altar rails? Why do Catholics genuflect going in and out of the pews? Why do we have May processions and crown Our Lady? Much of this doesn't even really go on anymore, and that is a problem because it kind of destroys Catholic identity. And if you were to measure it against, maybe sort of cultural markers, how do Americans express some of their Americanism? Well, we have baseball, and we go to a baseball game or sporting event. We stand up and we sing the national anthem. We take our baseball hats off, that kind of thing. If you didn't do any of those things, little by little, as a culture, in America, you start to sort of lose your sense of what it is to be an American. So we're looking at it from sort of that perspective in the church. So it's not a sin to not do any of these things, but that's not the question. It's a question of, am I losing my identity? Am I losing my religion? And that's what the show is about. So Father was kind enough to talk to us last week about just something very simple like Catholic vocabulary, yes. Our Lord versus the Lord.
Yes.
Let's talk for a moment about something that really was very visible, for many, many churches. Catholic churches had these beautiful, even small little churches in small little neighborhoods. Yes. They were always beautiful construction and architecture inside.
Yes. Yeah.
And one of the things that was there as a Catholic identity marker were those communion rails,
right.
Those altar rails.
Right.
First of all, what was the purpose of them? Obviously to kneel and receive Holy Communion, but beyond that, there's some theology behind that.
Yes, of course. Well, first of all, on the obvious visible level, it was reverence, that you would kneel, that you would be in a submissive form, acknowledging that this is our Lord Jesus Christ. He's really, truly, and substantially present in the most blessed sacrament, body, blood, soul, and divinity, wholly and entirely in his divine person, human nature, and his human nature and divine nature. So kneeling down was an expression of that. It was a sacramental expression of our reverence. Mm-hmm. So it was a sign of reverence to kneel.
Right.
Reverence being, of course, the virtue of religion, acknowledging our Lord as our Creator, as a Redeemer, so on and so forth. But also, interesting enough, and I don't think a lot of people think about this, is that altar rail represented a delineation from the sacred space of the sanctuary mm-hmm. to the nave. In other words, this is the borderline between where the sacrifice is being offered, where only the priest and the deacon and the altar boys could come and conduct the worship, the Holy Sacrifice and Mass, and the people who are coming up and receiving. Mm-hmm. So it was also a delineation mark as well, and that's been lost too.
Well, let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
That there is a dividing line,
right,
between the ordained mm-hmm. and the laity,
right.
between you and I. I haven't
right.
had an ontological, change happen to my soul
right.
by virtue of the fact of ordination.
And I can tell you it is.
Yes, it is.
I'll tell you a story sometime.
So, I think many Catholics, don't even understand, they understand obviously a difference in function.
Sure.
But they don't understand the difference that happens inside
that's right.
the priest
right.
when he gets ordained. And
right.
the altar rail is just, that's one more experience. So there's a theology behind that altar
that's
rail.
Right.
So and lots of people don't like that separation.
Right, right.
Oh, Father's as good as me, which means I'm as good as Father,
mm-hmm.
and as important as Father.
Right.
Let's talk about that for a little bit here, and how that's expressed in that rail, in that separation of the sanctuary right. where the priest is,
right.
and the nave where we
right.
are.
Because in the Fathers of Mercy we have a beautiful Carrara marble altar rail. Mm-hmm. So when people who visit come there and they walk up, oh wow, I can't go beyond this point,
right?
Because we have a beautiful altar of sacrifice, all marble, and the high altar, which you took from a church in Cincinnati that was closed. It's 120 years old. So they realize, wait, once you go beyond this point, this is the Holy of Holies. Mm-hmm. We can't just walk in there, and violate that space. So right away it tells them this is special, the altar rail, the altar, the place of sacrifice where the priests are. This is holy ground. I can't come up there. Mm-hmm. And as the difference of the priesthood Yes, it's an ontological change, like you said,
What does that mean, ontological?
change in their very being and essence, not so much naturally,
Right.
as one formator told me. Says, Brother Lewis, before I became ordained, ordination is not going to change your personality, and it didn't.
Right.
But what it did, it smooths out the rough edges of personality, and whatever gifts and talents you bring in naturally in the priesthood is supernaturally elevated.
Mm-hmm.
I have insights on the Eucharist and on the faith. My gosh, even as a well-educated layperson studying on the Father Heart, never, and I would have those insights because of the intimacy I have with the Eucharist, number one.
Right.
Number two, 20 minutes after I was ordained, when the smoke was still in the, hanging up in the rafters, I was doing my first blessings of people. And a funny thing happened, Michael. Guess what happened?
Tell me.
People start falling down. Boom, boom, boom. It was a phenomenon called resting in the Spirit. Yeah. And I didn't even know it myself. And I looked to my fellow ordinand. He was a Navy corpsman.
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Crotty, Father Christopher Crotty.
Yes,
you know
yes,
him.
yes. Wonderful.
And I looked
priest.
at him, I says, Chris, you got to help these people. These people are sick, they're falling down. He says, no, you have charismatic gifts and talents for your priesthood. And I didn't have that 20 minutes before. I was given a sign right away. Mm-hmm. Boom, boom, boom. And people were being healed immediately.
What do you think Catholics today don't understand this difference between priest and not priest?
Okay, well,
ordained and not ordained.
Let's go to your language again.
Okay.
Alter Christus,
Yes.
another Christ. Catechism, priest and the bishop, of course, highest level of priesthood, when they offer holy sacrifice of mass, do it in persona capitis Christi, in the person of Christ the head. When you are ordained, you cross the border and you're a member of the headship of Christ,
Right.
of the leadership of Christ. Okay, when you speak against a priest, especially unjust, make unjust accusations, you mock them, demean, you argue with them, you're attacking one of the Lord's anointed. And that's very serious consequences people don't realize they have, against the priest. And the priest himself, when I was ordained, in the 12 years I've been ordained, I feel like there's been an aura of grace and protection that I have.
Yes.
That I didn't have before I was ordained. Not that I'm any better than the person who's not ordained in that sense, but I've got much more grace and power to ward off temptations, but also to see situations and address it, and give some kind of.
So people don't think. Let's be clear, so people aren't thinking, well, there's a priest sitting there saying he's better and more important than all of us.
Which I didn't say. No.
You get these because your role is to serve.
That's right.
And you need these.
I need the grace.
Serve, right?
Right.
Let's go into that a little bit.
Okay, talk about sacerdotal grace. You're given the grace to preach, to offer the holy sacrifice to the Mass with reverence. You're given the power to discern when you hear in confessions exactly the kind of advice you need to people who are suffering from serious mortal sins. You don't have that grace before you're ordained.
Right.
In fact, I'll tell you, as a young seminarian, the thing that most seminarians fear and tremble about becoming a priest is, will I be a good confessor?
Yeah.
But once you get ordained, you get that grace to do that, you see. And so you become a pastor of souls, a confidant of people who are struggling, and you get insights into certain people's why they sin, why they do the things they do, and you can even discern that even before they start talking to you. You get certain supernatural insights.
And all of this is summed up in that rail,
Right.
that communion rail that
Right.
separates the sanctuary from the people,
Right.
from the nave.
The very deep theology from,
And talk to us for a second, as a matter of fact, even about how the rail, so it wasn't a communion rail, but there was a separation even in the temple.
Right.
Of the Jews, there was
Right.
a separation there in
The
that
Holy of
temple.
Holies.
The Holy of Holies, the Holy. There was a part where you did not advance
Right.
if you were not one of the priests.
Right.
Right.
Right. And of course, in the Eastern rites, you have the iconostasis, where they just close and shut up the whole sanctuary,
Right.
and then they open it up for communion so the priest can go down and give communion. So there's that in the Eastern Rite Church.
What do you think so many Catholics think that's like? Priests being stuck up or thinking they're more important. We need to rip these rails out and kind of level the playing field here. That's a very un-Catholic way of thinking, isn't it?
Of course it is. Of course it is. It's part of the Protestantization that has set into the Western world in the last 500 years, and it's seeped into
Since Martin
Catholicism.
Luther.
Right. And And we have to, as a church, keep fighting that off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the manifestations of that. And of course, there's a loss of sense of the sacred and of the holy,
Right.
and of morality and of reverence, which is happening since the 1960s.
Sure.
So all that's feeding in. There's a cultural attack on the church as well. The sexual revolution, of course, I was 11, 12, 13, 14, back in 64, 65, 66. And
Yeah.
I could see all this unraveling and the effect it had on the church itself.
Yeah.
And so that's what all this thing was doing. The priest is demeaning the role of the priest, and also, but really demeaning the role of Christ itself. It's an
Sure.
attack on the priest, is an attack on Christ.
Yeah, that's the core from a diabolical
That's right.
perspective.
That's right. That's it.
What did our Lord reveal at the Last Supper?
Right.
He turns to Peter and says, "Satan has demanded you all to sift
Right.
you like wheat."
Right.
He knows that's how he gets to. He can't touch Christ, but he can touch Christ's priests.
But as a priest also, I think a lot of the problem is with the priest too, because they say, don't call me Father Louis, call me Louis, call me Louis.
Call me Bob.
Call me Bob, whatever, and they try to, in an effort to be more outgoing, to go out into, like Pope Francis, he can go out into the world. He goes right into the slums and the poorest of the poor. But he does it as a priest. He doesn't take away his priesthood or his collar. He does it as a priest.
Right.
And that's what the priests themselves have to gain. Their dignity, what they are as a priest, as an altar priestess, what the people should see in the priest, your reverence, your charity, your chastity, your kindness, being another Christ to the people.
Put those altar rails back
Right.
so the laity can kneel down and receive God.
Right.
And two, so the laity and the priests
Right.
are both aware of your privileged place in
Right.
the kingdom. You belong
That's
to
right.
the headship of Christ.
And another thing liturgically, it would obviate the necessity for extraordinary ministers, because you could communicate much quicker.
Oh, sure.
And I've had that experience too. 2 or 3 times faster, so you'd only need 1 or 2 priests.
Right. Yeah.
So it makes it a lot easier to distribute communion.
So, is it a sin to not have communion rails in the church? No. But again, the standard isn't just we
Right.
just avoid sin.
Right.
We also do good.
Right, and it would also encourage reverence, acknowledgement of the difference between the sanctuary and the nave, the distinction between the baptism of the priesthood and the lay baptism,
Absolutely.
and many other things. So it's not just one thing; it unravels a whole theology and philosophy behind it, sacramental theology, Christology, everything.
Absolutely. Father Louis, put back the altar rails, right?
Oh yeah, they're doing slowly but surely. We did it at the Fathers of Mercy.
Yeah, we're coming back. All right. Well, everybody, this is Michael Voris with Father Louis from the Fathers of Mercy in the middle of our shooting season of Losing My Religion. And again, we don't want to encourage people to lose their religion. We want to know how their religion is being lost so they go back and reclaim it. All of us, Catholics, priests, and laity.
Right.
For churchmilitant.tv, I'm Michael Voris. God bless you. We'll see you next week.